Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith, and today I want to talk about Fog of War, an off-the-line mechanic that I think does deserve a place in Fire Emblem, and I'm going to defend its place. The fact is that Fog of War in Fire Emblem, like Fog of War in many games, plays an important purpose, even if that purpose is not always understood or not always agreed with. First of all, let's talk about what Fog of War is, how it's implemented in Fire Emblem, and how it's implemented in other games, just as an example. Fog of War, generally speaking, is a mechanic that reinforces the idea that if you're not in a location, if you're not able to see something, you don't know what's there, and that enemies or traps or other things could be existing in those locations that you don't know about, that you can't see. And, notably, when you leave an area, it gets hidden again, so you don't just get to permanently see all the things that you have ever seen. You need to be constantly looking or constantly have it lit up, or however that works, in order to be able to see things. And so if you leave an area, then theoretically the enemy could fill in that area and then be behind you and you wouldn't necessarily know. It also means that if there are enemies on the map or things on the map that you haven't explored yet, you don't know where they are, you don't know what's there, and so you won't know how to avoid them, or maybe how best to engage. Fog of War, ultimately, at the end of the day, is a system that creates hidden information, or imperfect information, and how you manage imperfect or hidden information, in my opinion, is the core part of most strategy games, or most strategic elements in games. For instance, in Magic the Gathering, or in any card game, most card games at least, you don't get to see what the opponent's hand is. You don't get to see what's in their hand at all times. If you did, that would drastically change the game. You would know exactly where to hold your counter spells for, where to hold your direct damage, what creatures to play, what things not to play, and it would cripple the whole game if you played face up at a high level. Same thing with, like, real-time strategy games, especially ones that have a robust counter system, something like StarCraft 2, or even just the first StarCraft, Brood War. If you had perfect information about the other player's base, the other player's movement at all times, if there was no Fog of War and you were able to see everywhere they were expanding to, or every structure they were building, or every place they were moving their units to, this kind of defeats the strategy of the game. People hack the game in order to allow that to happen. It's called map hacks, it's called vision hacks. People do this, and the advantage they gain is so great, so phenomenally great, that these have to be banned and the cheaters, like, ostracized right away. Otherwise, there is no possible way to beat someone within any realm of remotely close skill to you if they're able to just see everything you're doing. Fog of War is very important, and that dealing with hidden or imperfect information is what makes it a strategy game. It's a fundamental aspect of what makes it a strategy game. And so, not knowing what your opponent's doing, not knowing maybe where they are at all times, not knowing their exact loadouts at all times, is very important to making it a game, to making it interesting, to making it so you don't just solve it. I think that in Fire Emblem we get a bad idea of what a strategy or tactic game means because of the nature of some aspects of the game, because of the nature of, like, solutions. The game, once you start getting into stuff like 0% growth LTCs, those are interesting in its own right to be able to figure out, but once you solve the puzzle, what else is there to solve? So Fire Emblem, in a lot of ways, is a tactics game, but is also a puzzle game, and so once you solve the puzzle, what are you gonna do? Like, the game stops being interesting. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, for instance, you figure out where you're able to save warps, and then you just warp Marth and your boss killer to the end of the map, kill the boss, seize. And then you just math out what forges you need to make in order to be able to kill every boss. Once the game is solved, anyone can pick it up, repeat this step of moves, and win. I don't find that interesting. I don't think there's any strategy to it. I think it's you're solving a pre-solved puzzle at that point. Fog of War allows people... Like, I mean, Fire Emblem still gets solved. Let's be real. Fire Emblem still gets solved. Fog of War, no Fog of War. But Fog of War allows people to not necessarily be able to solve the map from just looking at it. You have to play the map in order to figure out what's on there, figure out what's going on. And I find that more interesting. Now, some people complain that Fog of War is unfair. One, because they say, oh, well, you don't have any tools to counteract Fog of War. And two, because they say the AI cheats. Let's tackle the first one, because that's an outright lie. Every single game with Fog of War has introduced some mechanic to allow you to counteract the Fog of War, either before or during the first Fog of War chapter in the game. Let's go over it. Thracia, Chapter 2X, you can find torches in the mountain camps, like the mountains or the islands, whatever they are. Fire Emblem 6, I'm pretty sure you get a torch staff right before, either a torch or a torch staff right before the first Fog of War chapter. Is there even Fog of War in Fire Emblem 6? Or is it only in Fire Emblem 7 and Fire Emblem 8? No, there is Fog of War in Fire Emblem 6. The desert, the sandstorm creates Fog of War. I know you at least have thieves that can see farther. Fire Emblem 7, Lin mode gives you a whole tutorial. You don't, yeah, actually you do have Matthew, I think. Maybe you don't have Matthew. But the village will give you a torch, and the torch allows you to see farther. And the Fog of War doesn't even start on the first turn, it starts like second turn. Fire Emblem 8, you can get a torch from the village in Chapter 5, the first Fog of War being Chapter 6. You can also go back on the overworld to buy a torch staff from Seraphu. And you also have Colm, a thief, to be able to see farther. Hot take, maybe, I think that Chapter 6 is better because of Fog of War, not worse. And there are a lot of people that I've heard of and seen that really hate Fog of War to the extent that they think it's the worst thing ever. And just, like, say that any map with Fog of War, or at least the vast majority of maps with Fog of War, are just worse. And I don't think that's true. Back to the point of AI cheating in Fog of War, the way it's handled in Fire Emblem is that the AI knows where you are and is able to move their units and attack you through Fog of War even when you should be hidden, but you're not able to do the same to them. I believe that is a little unfair, but I will give them a little bit of extra leeway because I know that the way that AI works, it kind of has to know where you are. Otherwise, it breaks. So basically, you'd either have to have every single Fog of War map have very manually coded AI that's different from AI in every other chapter, or you allow AI to cheat, or the AI kind of breaks and the map just either turns weird, turns non-functional, or becomes such that like every AI has to wait until you're in vision range of them to be able to move, which I think is not what people want. It's also interesting on that waiting until you're in vision range to move, is that people say that Fire Emblem Engage... There are people that say that Fire Emblem Engage has the best Fog of War, or like the easiest or least frustrating Fog of War to manage. The only thing that Engage does that other games don't, or that hasn't at least been present in some other games, is Micaiah's emblem, Shine Weapon, which only is only accessible in 2 out of the 3 Fog of War maps in the game. Other than that, Fog of War in Engage is actually the most restrictive version of Fog of War they've ever had. Side grade to Thracia Fog, which is actually Black Map and not Fog of War. Black Map is when you can't even see the terrain, it's just the entire map is black, versus Fog of War is you can see the terrain, but you can't see what's on it, like who's on it. Outside of Thracia Black Map, Engage's Fog of War is actually the most restrictive because you can't move into a square you can't see. Instead of being able to move into those squares and then just being ambushed by or if you try to move through a square that has an enemy in it that you can't see, you just stop your movement and end your turn. I get that people don't like getting interrupted and stopping their turns, and that can feel really unfair. So maybe Fog of War's extra restrictions in Engage are managing to make it so people think it's more fair because they have to move slower through it, or they have to use stuff like torch or Illum staves, torches, and thief vision in order to progress. And so because they're having to use the tools the game gives them, instead of them being effectively optional, they don't feel Fog of War is as much of an issue? I'm having a hard time understanding why people think Engage Fog of War is so much better than other Fog of Wars, because in my mind it's a lot more restrictive. I don't think it's bad, but it's a lot more restrictive. It is like the most restrictive Fog of War. Do people just not know how to use the tools to counteract Fog of War in the other games? I've had people literally come up to me in my streams and being like, yeah, the game doesn't give you any tools to counteract Fog of War. And I'm like, bruh, what? Are we playing the same game? Are we playing the same version of the game? I don't know. I just don't understand it. Anyway, back on track a little bit. Fog of War has fixed something that the Fire Emblem community has been longing for a return for whatever reason. PvP. If you had a Wi-Fi connection and the Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon game for DS, you had access to, while the DS Wi-Fi was up, a very enjoyable version of Fire Emblem PvP. Basically, you had to build 5 units, you could build a team of 5 units, send them in, you got a randomly generated map, and the map was covered in Fog of War, and you had to fight another player's 5 units. And granted, a lot of this was not fun because most players hacked their units so they would have max stats and whatnot before entering in, or be in like illegal classes or stuff like that. But I was able to build a team, save all my stat boosters, use them to just max up a team, and win a lot of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon matches, so many so that I filled out the entire card collection. They had a system of cards where after you win a match, you get a card, and you get random cards, and then these cards have small effects on the match. And what cards you play affect the match. It's a fun system, it's a cool system, maybe I'll do a video on it later. But because the map had Fog of War, it made it so it wasn't just like Fate's PvP. Fate's PvP, well, watch the Bismix video on that, but basically people made these super units, ungodly super units, with super meticulously crafted builds that were just able to annihilate you. And then people would just stand just outside of attack range of each other and say, hey, you attack me first, you attack me first, you attack me first. Just outside of attack range, so neither one could engage. So basically, whoever puts their unit forward into range is gonna lose. Or is at least at a serious disadvantage. Has to outplay the opponent. Has to make their opponent make a mistake. That's not fun. But if you have Fog of War, then you're encouraged to explore, and you're encouraged to branch out, and you're encouraged to say, hey, because you don't know, if you're not in vision range, you don't know if you're outside of attack range or not. And so you can move, and then suddenly, hey, I'm in attack range. You're in attack range. I can ambush you. You don't know how many of my units are over here. You want to come through? You want to attack me? If I'm paying attention, I can see what you attack me with, and I can attack those units back, even if you kill me. Fog of War creates an extra layer of strategy. And I think it's these layers of strategy that really are missing from Fire Emblem PvP. Bring back Fog of War in Fire Emblem PvP, I think it will solve 90% of problems people have with it. But that's just me, that's just my take. So, what do we do? And why is Fog of War broken? Are there elements where Fog of War is bad? Yes. I think that there are some maps in Fire Emblem where Fog of War is used that are legitimately unfair. Most of them exist in New Mystery of the Emblem. If you've ever played some of the assassin maps, there's at least one that just has 10 ranged ballisticians and or swarm tomes or bolting or whatever, that they can find you, they can see you, they can hit you, and it's impossible to know what their range is. I think that Battle Before Dawn in Fire Emblem 7 is an unfair use of Fog of War, but I also think that's just an unfair map in general, very poorly designed, where you have to get to your defend objective before it dies, and most of the time you'll barely be able to get there just in time, assuming you don't get stopped by a random enemy in the Fog of War, or held up by a door or someone that you barely didn't kill or something. It's a very poorly designed map in general, and the Fog of War does not help matters. Outside of some of those maps, though, I think that Fog of War generally is a good thing, and can add a lot of fun tension to maps. I just think it needs to be handled well. And part of handling it well is flagging what's happening. Because in Fog of War, players can't see what's happening, but if you flag what's happening properly, then players won't feel that the ambush is unfair. For instance, Fire Emblem 6, the desert map there, Shifting Sands, I think. Whatever it's called, maybe Shifting Sands is the FE8 desert map. The desert map in Fire Emblem 6. I believe chapter 14 or 15. The map is presented to you as, hey, I think, Burn is supposedly here, so you know that you're going to have to deal with Wyvern Riders. Very close to you, there is a Manakete. If you move around a thief, you can actually see it, so you know there's dragons wandering the map. You know there's cliffs. The most unfair thing about that map are actually the status staves, because you can't see them before they status you. But what the map does, one of its things it does, is that later on in the map, a lot of berserkers and brigands spawn. A ton of berserkers and brigands spawn from behind you, and then charge towards the right, towards wherever you are. However, the map drags the screen over, plays a little cutscene of the berserkers coming in, that little, bandit music and whatnot, and then lets you go back. So it shows you, hey, berserkers are now on the map, be careful. It doesn't tell you how many berserkers, it doesn't tell you exactly where they are, but it shows you, hey, there are berserkers in the bottom left corner of the map, and they are on the prowl, they are on the hunt, they are moving out. You are either on a clock or you're going to have to deal with some berserkers. This level of flagging is very, very good and very, very important. So anyone who's looking to make Fire Emblem hacks or whatnot and include Fog of War in them, take note. Think about that. Make sure that if you are ambushing people, that you deliberately flag something and be like, hey, this is going to happen. The only other instance where I think that absolutely no flagging can work is if you are basically setting up the equivalent of like a dungeon crawl. And in that instance, that's what Thracia Fog does best. Is that some of these castles you go into, when you don't know the layout, everything's black, and you have to figure it out. And so it's very atmospheric. It can be extremely, extremely cruel to the player. Anyone who's played Pan's chapter, Pern, whatever his new translation name is, the one where you can recruit him a number of ways and get Lana to be... Lara, whatever. Or make your dancer into a dancer. That map is very, very, very cruel if you are playing it without knowledge and just with Fog of War, and it's designed to be that way. Cruel, chaotic, confusing. However, because warp is warp, you can just solve it and cheese it, and it doesn't actually matter. That's part of Thracia's charm, I think, but at the same time, if you wanted to make like a detailed, like a dungeon crawl map, or something where you're going into the belly of the beast, going into an unexplored area, somewhere where you have no intelligence, Fog of War makes sense to implement, in the sense that, hey, you should go forward, you should figure out these things, explore the map, find out, and take it safe, take it slow. I would love if maps that did that allowed you to basically clear out areas behind you and before moving forward, so that way you would at least know, hey, if I go backwards, if I retreat, I'll be safe. That way you always have some place that's safe, even though you are forced to explore dangerous unexplored territory. I think that would be a good solution for that. Just one of many. If you have any other potential solutions or ideas to fix Fog of War, let me know in the comments below. But I think Fog of War is not a bad thing. I think Fog of War is actually a very good thing when used appropriately and when used well. Ultimately, it's a tool of game design. Use the tool well, and it will be a good thing for you. Use it poorly, and a lot of people are going to hate it. As always, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this video. Let me know what your thoughts are on Fog of War. If you have any other topics you'd like to hear my thoughts on, leave that in the comments down below as well. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, join if you can. If not, no worries. And until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.